My name is Sarah. I am 30 years old, a mother to a wonderful 10-year-old son, Jake, from my first marriage, and now remarried to John, who is 38. John and I also have a 1-year-old daughter together. When I first met John 6 years ago, I was still finding my footing after a painful divorce. We connected over long late-night phone conversations, and I was struck by his warmth, humor, and ability to listen. John had never been married before, nor did he have children, and yet he welcomed Jake into his life with open arms. I felt like I had found someone who could be my partner in every sense. A man who could help me rebuild the life I envisioned. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope, to believe in love again. But love isn't just about beginnings. It's about what comes after, the challenges that test the bonds you've built. And I was about to learn just how fragile those bonds could be. As we started our life together, John would occasionally mention his past relationships. There was one story that stood out. A girl from his teenage years, his first love. He spoke of her with a mixture of fondness and melancholy, describing how their relationship ended when he left for the army and she moved on. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone has a past, right? But there was something in the way John's voice would soften when he spoke of her, how his eyes would cloud over, lost in memories. It unsettled me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. His mother also brought her up sometimes, reminiscing about how heartbroken John had been when the relationship ended. She was special to him, his mother would say, her tone wistful. I would nod politely, pushing aside the growing unease in my chest. After all, the past was the past, wasn't it? If this story resonates with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more meaningful content. Let's continue this journey together. It was New Year's Eve, and John and I decided to take Jake to the city center to see the lights. It was a magical night, full of music, laughter, and the crisp bite of winter air. As we stood in the crowd, John suddenly froze. I followed his gaze and saw a woman standing nearby, her hand entwined with another man's. She was beautiful, with a warm smile that lit up her face. I noticed how John's demeanor changed. His shoulders stiffened, and a sadness flickered in his eyes. "Who is she?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. "It's her," he said, barely above a whisper. Her. The first love he had spoken of with such longing. My heart sank as I watched him, completely absorbed in her presence, even from a distance. That night, as we returned home, John was unusually quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that a part of him was still with her, even after all these years. After that night, I began noticing things I hadn't before. John seemed more distant, his mind often elsewhere. He would occasionally ask mutual friends about her, what she was doing, where she worked, if she was happy. I wanted to brush it off as mere curiosity, but it felt deeper than that. It felt like longing. The more he brought her up, the more I wondered if I would ever be enough for him. When I finally worked up the courage to ask him, "Do you still love her?" his reaction was defensive. "You're imagining things," he said, brushing me off. "I love you, Sarah. You're my wife." But his words didn't comfort me. There was a gap between what he said and what I felt. And that gap was filled with doubt. I found myself replaying our conversations in my mind, dissecting every word and glance for clues. Was it my imagination? Was I being paranoid? One day, I discovered something that deepened my fears. A small card, tucked away in his desk drawer. It was from her, written years ago, wishing him well as he left for the army. He had kept it all this time, a tangible reminder of a love that I feared still lingered in his heart. When I confronted him, he downplayed its significance. "It's just a memory," he said, his tone dismissive. But for me it was more than that. It was a symbol of what I would always be competing against. I didn't want to feel this way. I didn't want to question my worth or my place in his life. But the doubts were growing too loud to ignore. As the months went on, our marriage began to feel like a fragile boat in a storm. John and I talked less, and when we did, our conversations felt strained. I tried to pour my energy into Jake and our daughter, hoping that focusing on the children would fill the emptiness I felt. But it didn't. John, too, seemed to retreat further into himself. He would spend hours scrolling through old photo albums or sitting silently, lost in thought. But it didn't. John, too, seemed to retreat further into himself. He would spend hours scrolling through old photo albums or sitting silently, lost in thought. I felt like I was living with a stranger. Someone who was physically present but emotionally distant. One night, as we sat at the dinner table, I couldn't hold back anymore. "John," I said, my voice trembling. "Do you even want to be here? With me? With us?" He looked at me, startled, but didn't answer right away. The silence spoke louder than words ever could. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I deserved to feel loved, to feel like I was someone's first choice. One evening, as John sat in the living room, I mustered the courage to confront him. "John," I said, "you need to choose. Me or the past." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "Sarah, I love you. But a part of me will always care for her. She was a big part of my life." His honesty, while appreciated, broke me. I realized then that I couldn't compete with a memory, nor should I have to. John's behavior became harder to ignore. He wasn't just distant. He seemed lost in his thoughts. Nights became lonelier as he often retreated into his silence. I started noticing the little things. How he would absent-mindedly stare at his phone or take longer walks alone. One evening, I found him sitting on the porch, holding an old box. Inside were letters, faded photos, and a worn-out card from his first love. My chest tightened as I stood there, frozen. When he saw me, he quickly closed the box, muttering, "Just old memories." I wanted to scream, "Am I not enough?" But the words lodged in my throat. That night, I lay awake, wondering if I would ever be the woman who made him forget his past. A week later, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted John. "Why do you keep holding on to her?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked startled but didn't deny it. "She was my first love, Sarah. It's not something you just forget." His words felt like knives. "So what am I to you, John? A consolation prize? Tears streamed down my face. He tried to explain, but his silence spoke louder. It became clear. His heart had never fully been mine. That realization shattered something inside me. I started piecing together more of John's past, speaking to his mother and even overhearing conversations he had with his friends. The more I learned, the heavier the weight became. It wasn't just that he loved her. It was that he hadn't moved on. One evening, his mother mentioned that John had recently asked about his first love's whereabouts. He said it was just curiosity, she added, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I began to question whether our entire relationship was built on a foundation of half-truths. This journey taught me to value myself and to never settle for less than I deserve. Love will come again, I know, and when it does, it will be built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Weeks after my conversation with John, life returned to normal. One evening, while walking in the park, I noticed someone sitting alone on a bench. His face was unfamiliar, but there was a kindness in his expression. He smiled as I walked past. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know where the nearest library is?" His voice was warm, polite. I gave him directions, and he thanked me with a smile that lingered in my mind even after I walked away. Over the next few days, I found myself running into him again. At the cafe, at the grocery store. Each time, our conversations grew longer. His name was Daniel, and he had recently moved to the city to start over, much like I had. Daniel and I began spending more time together. He was gentle, funny, and curious about the world in a way that felt refreshing. He shared stories about his past, about how he had left a toxic relationship to find peace. One evening, as we sat under the stars, he turned to me and asked, "What about you, Elena? What brought you here?" For the first time, I opened up about John, about Olivia, and about the journey that had led me here. Daniel listened intently, his presence a comforting balm to old wounds. "You've been through so much," he said softly, "but you're still standing. That says a lot about who you are." His words stayed with me, lighting a spark of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Just as things were beginning to feel right with Daniel, I received another call, from Olivia. Her voice was tense. "Elena, I need to tell you something," she said. "John has been talking about you. A lot. I think he's planning to reach out again." My stomach dropped. "Why would he do that?" "I don't know," she replied. "But I wanted to warn you. You don't owe him anything, Elena." Her words were both a warning and a reminder. I couldn't let myself be dragged back into the chaos I had worked so hard to escape. True to Olivia's warning, John showed up unannounced one evening. Seeing him on my doorstep brought back a flood of emotions. Anger, sadness, and a twinge of pity. "I just needed to see you," he said. "I don't have anyone else." "John, you can't keep doing this," I said firmly. "You need to focus on yourself, on rebuilding your life. I'm not your solution." He looked defeated but nodded. "I'm sorry, Elena, for everything." Watching him walk away, I felt a sense of finality. This time, I knew it was truly over. As the weeks passed, my bond with Daniel grew stronger. He was different. Steady, reliable, and honest. For the first time, I felt safe in a relationship. One evening, as we walked by the river, Daniel stopped and took my hand. "Elena, I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know. I see a future with you. And I'm willing to wait until you're ready." His sincerity brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future free of the pain and betrayal that had once defined my past. Out of the blue, I received another message from Olivia. This time, her tone was lighter, happier. "I thought you'd like to know," she wrote. "I've decided to move too. A fresh start feels like the right choice." Her message brought a smile to my face. It was proof that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds. We exchanged a few more messages, wishing each other well. It felt like a chapter closing, not just for her, but for me too. One quiet evening, as I sat with Daniel watching the sunset, I realized how far I had come. The pain of the past no longer weighed me down. Instead, it had become a part of my story, a reminder of my resilience and strength. When Daniel asked me if I wanted to take the next step in our relationship, I didn't hesitate. For the first time, I felt ready. Ready to love, ready to trust, and ready to embrace the future. One quiet evening, as I sat with Daniel watching the sunset, I realized how far I had come. The pain of the past no longer weighed me down. Instead, it had become a part of my story, a reminder of my resilience and strength. When Daniel asked me if I wanted to take the next step in our relationship, I didn't hesitate. For the first time, I felt ready. Ready to love, ready to trust, and ready to embrace the future. Life with Daniel was everything I had hoped for. Peaceful, joyful, and full of possibilities. We supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's successes, and built a life that felt authentic and true. Looking back, I realized that every twist and turn, every moment of heartbreak and healing, had led me here. I was stronger, wiser, and more open to the beauty of life. As I walked hand in hand with Daniel through the park one evening, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. My journey wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was only just beginning. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe to join our community. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of hope, resilience, and love. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story too.